The day I walked into Hargrove and Associates for my final interview, I wore the same blazer I had worn to every interview for the past 3 years. Navy blue, slightly faded at the elbows. I had pressed it the night before with a travel iron I borrowed from my neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, who also lent me her good handbag without being asked because she had seen me leave that morning and understood what the day meant without needing me to explain it. I was 31 years old. I had $47 in my checking account. And I was about to sit across from the woman who had made my adolescence a quiet, sustained exercise in surviving someone else's cruelty. I had known this was coming for 6 days. 6 days of deciding whether to withdraw my application. 6 days of sitting with the specific discomfort of a person who has built something real and is being asked whether the past gets to have a say in the present. I did not withdraw. My name is Amara. And this is the story of what it costs to be underestimated by the wrong person for long enough. I grew up in Millhaven, which is the kind of small town that exists in every state. The kind that looks fine from the outside and asks a great deal from the people inside it who do not have enough. My mother, Grace, worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood: days at the dry cleaner on Emmett Street, evenings at the hospital cafeteria 4 nights a week. She came home smelling like steam and soup, and she always asked about my homework before she sat down. Always. Even on the nights when I could see the tiredness sitting on her like a second skin. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, the side that did not have the good grocery store or the newer school. I shared a room with my younger brother Darius until I was 15. He had asthma, which meant that every winter was a negotiation between what we had and what his lungs required. And what we had was never quite enough to make that negotiation comfortable. My father was not in the picture in the way that phrase means when someone says it without wanting to say more. He left when Darius was 2. He sent money occasionally, inconsistently, in amounts that felt more like punctuation than support. My mother never spoke badly about him in front of us. That particular restraint cost her something I didn't understand until I was old enough to know what restraint actually costs. I was not the kind of child who announced her ambitions. I kept them close, the way you keep things close when you've learned that not everyone who hears about a dream will treat it carefully. I read everything I could find. I stayed late in the school library because it was warm and quiet, and because Mrs. Osei, the librarian, never asked why I was still there at closing time. She simply handed me the book she thought I should read next, and told me to bring it back when I was done. I was good at school, the way some people are good at survival, out of necessity, and then out of love for the thing itself. Once I discovered the necessity had made room for something real. And then there was Celine Hargrove. Celine was the kind of girl that a certain kind of town produces and then admires uncritically. Her father owned Hargrove Construction, which in Millhaven meant he owned a significant portion of the town's self-image. The Hargroves had the large house on Alderman Road, the one with the circular driveway, and the landscaping that looked maintained because it was. Celine wore this as a fact of nature rather than an accident of birth, the way people wear things when they have never been asked to consider the alternative. We were in the same grade at Millhaven Regional. We were never friends. That was never a possibility that either of us considered, though for very different reasons. What Celine was, specifically and consistently, was the person who noticed me, not in the way that matters, in the other way. It started small, the way these things always start small, with comments designed to land lightly enough to be deniable. A remark about my shoes in 7th grade, the kind with the worn sole I had fixed with a strip of electrical tape, because we were 3 weeks from my mother's next paycheck. A remark about my lunch in 8th grade, the sandwich my mother made every morning with the bread from the day-old rack at Fenwick's Market. The comments were always casual, always delivered with the particular smile of someone who had never been told that their comfort came at a cost to someone else. By high school, they had graduated into something more structured. Celine had an audience by then, a group of girls who moved with her, the way smaller boats move in the wake of something larger, not because they chose the direction, but because the current had them. In their presence, my secondhand jacket became a performance. My carefully maintained dignity became a target. My silence became, in their interpretation, evidence that they were right about me. I remember one afternoon in the junior year hallway, Celine stopped in front of me while her friends arranged themselves into their usual geometry. She looked at my blazer, the same navy blazer actually. Different version, different year, same story. "Amara," she said in the voice she used when she wanted everyone in earshot to be listening. "Do you own more than one outfit? I'm asking sincerely, because I've been noticing a pattern and I'm starting to get concerned." Her friends laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't require something to actually be funny. I looked at her for a moment. I remember this moment specifically because I remember what I felt, and I remember choosing not to show it. I said, "I own enough." I picked up my bag and walked to class. It was not a dramatic response. It was not a comeback that silenced the hallway or changed anything about the social architecture of Millhaven Regional High School. It was simply true, and I had decided, somewhere between 7th grade and that afternoon, that the truth was the only thing worth spending on people like Celine Hargrove. What I did not say, could not have said, because I didn't have the language for it yet, was this: I own enough for now. What I'm building is for later, and later is the only scoreboard I'm keeping. I got a partial scholarship to Alderton University. Partial meaning I covered the rest through a combination of federal aid, 2 campus jobs, and a level of budgetary precision that would have impressed a forensic accountant. I studied business administration with a concentration in organizational development, which sounds formal and is, in fact, the study of why institutions succeed or collapse and what the people inside them do to affect that outcome. I was interested in this because I had spent my childhood watching my mother navigate systems that were not designed with her in mind, and I wanted to understand the architecture of those systems well enough to eventually build something different. I worked in the campus library 20 hours a week. I tutored underclassmen in accounting and economics. I ate in the dining hall on the meal plan and brought back fruit in my bag for the evenings, which was technically against the rules, and which every student in my situation did without discussion. I had one close friend, Priya, who was studying public health and who had the specific quality I find most valuable in a person. She said what she meant without apologizing for it and expected the same in return. We studied together on Sunday mornings in the corner of the library with bad coffee and good conversation and no performance of any kind. That friendship kept me honest during 4 years that required a great deal of honesty. I graduated in the top 8% of my class. I wore the same expression in every graduation photo that I wore in every photograph. Present, composed, not performing for the camera. My mother cried. Darius, who was 16 and had recently decided that visible emotion was incompatible with his sense of himself, stood beside her and blinked rapidly at the ceiling, which was his version of the same thing. My mother held my face in her hands afterward, the way mothers do when words have run out. "Everything I couldn't give you," she said. She didn't finish the sentence. "You gave me enough to get here," I said. "The rest was mine to do." She nodded. She did not let go of my face for another moment. I did not tell her then that getting here was only the beginning, that what I had actually spent 4 years doing was preparing for a much longer project. Some things you don't explain until you can show them. I spent the next 8 years building something deliberately, not quickly, not loudly, with the same patience my mother applied to everything that mattered, one careful decision compounding into the next. My first job was at a regional consulting firm in the city, 40 minutes from Millhaven. I was an analyst. I was the youngest person in the room at every meeting for 2 years, and I used that time the way I used every position I'd ever been in, to learn the things the role wasn't officially supposed to teach me. How decisions actually got made, where the power in a room actually lived, which problems the organization kept recycling because no one wanted to address their actual source. I was promoted twice in 3 years. The second promotion came with a conversation from my manager, David Osei, no relation to Mrs. Osei, the librarian, though I thought about her when he called me into his office, because good people seem to find you when you are moving in the right direction. David said, "You have a talent for seeing what's actually broken versus what looks broken. That's rare. Most people can't tell the difference." I said, "I grew up around systems that didn't work well for the people inside them. It gives you a certain eye." He looked at me for a moment. "Use it," he said, "not just here." I left the firm 4 years later, not because I was unhappy, because I had learned what I came to learn, and the next thing required more than that place could offer. I moved to a larger firm in the city. I led teams. I managed restructuring projects for organizations in 3 different industries. I made decisions with real consequences, and I lived in the outcome of those decisions long enough to understand what I had done right and what I needed to do differently. At 29, I started building what would become my own company. I spent a year planning before I told anyone. I mapped the market. I identified the specific gap. I built the financial model 3 times until it held up against every pressure I could apply to it. I saved. I prepared. I opened Greystone Organizational Consulting on a Tuesday morning in February. There was no launch event. There was a desk, a laptop, a phone, and a list of problems I knew how to solve for organizations that were currently paying someone else less capable to not solve them. Within 18 months, I had 6 clients. Within 3 years, I had 22. Within 5 years, Greystone had a staff of 14. A reputation in the industry that had been built entirely on outcomes rather than marketing, and a client roster that included 4 companies whose names you would recognize. I did not return to Millhaven during those years, not because I was hiding, because I was building, and building requires the full weight of your attention on what is in front of you rather than what is behind. My mother visited me in the city twice a year. Darius, who had grown into a quiet, precise man who worked in urban planning and shared my preference for saying exactly what he meant, came when he could. Mrs. Calloway sent cards at Christmas and occasionally at no occasion at all, which I found I loved more than the Christmas ones. Millhaven existed in the way that places from your past exist, as a coordinate, not a destination. Until the job listing changed that. I was not looking for new clients in Millhaven specifically. The referral came through a contact in the industry, a woman named Sandra Yee, who had used Greystone 2 years prior to restructure her mid-sized logistics firm. Sandra mentioned that Hargrove and Associates, the consulting arm that had grown out of Hargrove Construction over the past decade, was struggling with internal organizational collapse, high turnover, leadership dysfunction, a culture problem that had been papered over for long enough that the paper was now part of the problem. The firm's managing director was looking for an outside consultancy, premium budget, serious scope, the kind of engagement that, handled correctly, would add a significant line to Greystone's portfolio. The managing director of Hargrove and Associates was Celine Hargrove. I sat with Sandra's email for 20 minutes before I responded. Then I responded. I want to be precise about something because I think precision matters here. I did not pursue this engagement because of Celine. I pursued it because the work was real and the scope was significant, and Greystone was the right firm for the problem. Those facts existed independently of who was sitting on the other side of the table. What I chose, deliberately, was not to withdraw because of who was sitting on the other side of the table. That is a different thing. The distinction is important. Revenge is a project. I had never been interested in projects that required me to organize my life around someone else's behavior. What I was interested in was doing the work I was built to do in a room where someone who had once counted me as nothing would have to reckon, without my saying a word about it, with what nothing had become. That was not revenge. That was just showing up. The preliminary meeting was held on a Wednesday morning in the Hargrove and Associates offices, a renovated building on the better side of Millhaven that I had driven past as a teenager without once imagining I would enter as anything other than someone's employee. I arrived 8 minutes early. I wore a charcoal suit I had bought 3 years ago at a price that had felt significant, and now felt like exactly what it was: appropriate. My bag was good leather. My shoes were better. I had not borrowed anything from anyone. The receptionist offered coffee. I accepted. I was sitting in the waiting area reviewing my notes when Celine walked in from the back hallway. She was 41 now, 4 years older than the last time I'd seen her in person, though I had, of course, seen her in the professional context. Her LinkedIn profile, 2 industry articles, one local business feature that described Hargrove and Associates as a firm with significant potential that had struggled to convert potential into performance. I had read that last phrase 3 times when I found it, not with satisfaction, with recognition. Celine had the look of a woman who had grown into authority without quite growing into ease with it. She wore it like a garment that fit correctly but had been chosen by someone else. Her posture was deliberate in the way posture is deliberate when it requires effort. She walked toward me with the practiced warmth of a managing director meeting a vendor. Her hand extended, professional smile in place, eyes already moving to the folder under my arm, with the assessing look of someone who is calculating the meeting before it begins. And then she saw my face. The calculation stopped. She stood very still for a moment, just a moment, the kind of pause that would be invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it, and was entirely visible to me because I had spent years learning to read the rooms I walked into. "Ms. Osei," she said. Her voice was controlled. "Thank you for coming in." "Thank you for the meeting," I said. I shook her hand. My grip was steady. My expression was pleasant and entirely neutral. I gave her nothing to read. We walked into the conference room. I will not recount the full meeting because the meeting itself was not the story. The story was what was underneath it, the layer that only one person in that room was aware of. And that person was doing her job too well to let it show. What I will say is this. Within 20 minutes, it was clear that Hargrove and Associates had a structural problem that ran deeper than their current leadership wanted to admit. The turnover rate Celine described was a symptom. The symptom had a source, a culture of top-down decision-making that had been inherited directly from the construction company. A culture designed for projects and sites and contracts, not for the collaborative knowledge work that consulting actually required. People were leaving because the environment punished them for knowing things their managers didn't. I had seen this pattern before. I knew exactly what it cost and exactly what the correction required. I walked Celine through my preliminary assessment with the same directness I brought to every engagement. No performance, no softening, no audition energy. This was a problem. Here was its structure. Here was the approach that addressed the structure rather than the symptoms. Here was what that would require from leadership. That last part was where her expression shifted. What would be required from leadership? She repeated. Yes, the structural correction only holds if the people at the top change how they operate. That's non-negotiable. If leadership is willing to do that work, the outcomes I'm describing are achievable. If they're not, you'll cycle through another consultancy in 18 months with the same results. She was quiet for a moment. You're saying the problem is at the top. I'm saying the problem started at the top, moved down, and is now embedded at every level, which means the correction has to start at the top as well. She looked at me across the conference table, and in that look underneath the professional assessment, I saw something I had not expected to see. Not defensiveness, something closer to recognition. She hired Greystone 3 weeks later. The engagement lasted 7 months. I will not walk through every stage because that is not what this story is. What I will tell you is that Celine Hargrove was, professionally, something I had not entirely anticipated. She was difficult. She was controlling in the specific way that people are controlling when they are afraid of what happens if they let go. She pushed back on recommendations that required her to redistribute authority. She had 2 moments of genuine resistance that required direct conversations I did not enjoy having. But she also did the work. That was the thing I had not predicted, not fully. I had expected a person who performed change while quietly resisting it, which is the most common pattern I encounter in leadership engagement. What I found instead was a person who, once she understood that I was not there to embarrass her, but to fix what was actually broken, engaged with the process with something that looked, across 7 months, like genuine effort. The turnover rate decreased. The internal survey scores improved. The senior team began, slowly and not without friction, to operate differently. Not perfectly, differently, which is what real change actually looks like. On the last day of the formal engagement, Celine asked to meet with me privately before the final presentation to the board. I agreed. We sat in her office, just the 2 of us. The first time we had been in a room alone in the entire 7 months. She was quiet for a moment after her assistant closed the door. She looked at her desk, then out the window at Millhaven's main street below. "I knew who you were," she said. "The first day, the moment I saw you." "I know," I said. "I almost canceled the engagement." She paused. "Twice." "I know that too." She looked at me then. "Why did you take it?" I considered the question carefully because it deserved a careful answer. "Because the work was real," I said. "And because I decided a long time ago that the only thing worth building was something true. Something that stood on what it actually was, not on what anyone expected of me or what anyone assumed I couldn't do." She was quiet. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. Her voice had none of the managing director register in it. It was simply a voice. "For things that happened a long time ago." I know that a long time ago doesn't mean they don't matter. I know they cost you something. She stopped. I was a child who had never once been told that other people's comfort was my responsibility. And by the time I understood that, I'd already done damage I couldn't undo. I sat with that for a moment. The room was very quiet. Outside, Millhaven went about its Wednesday morning. "I'm not here for the apology," I said. "I was never here for that. I was here to do a job, and we did it." "Still," she said. "Still," I agreed. I looked at her and felt the specific absence of weight that comes when something you have been carrying for a long time is set down without ceremony. Not forgiveness as a performance, not reconciliation as a project, just the ordinary fact of 2 adults in a room acknowledging a truth and deciding that the truth was enough. "The work you did here was exceptional," she said. "I'll tell anyone who asks." "I know you will," I said, "because it was." She almost smiled. I drove out of Millhaven that evening on the same road I had taken in 7 months earlier. The sun was going down on the east side of town, the side with the apartment buildings and the bus stops and Fenwick's Market, where the day-old bread was 2 rows from the front. I drove past it. I did not stop. I did not need to. but I looked at it through the window and felt what it was. Part of the structure of what I was built from. Not a wound, a foundation. My mother called when I was 20 minutes out. How did it go? It went well, I said. The whole thing? All of it? All of it, I said. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear the television in the background, the specific evening news channel she had watched every night for as long as I could remember. You sound different, she said. I'm the same. No, she said, with the precision of a woman who has been reading her daughter accurately for 31 years. You sound like you put something down. I watched Millhaven disappear in the rearview mirror. Yeah, I said. I did. Good, she said. Come for dinner Sunday. I'm making the rice. I'll be there, I said. What I understand now, driving away from a town that once held everything I was measuring myself against, is that the people who underestimate you are not your problem. They are not your project. They are not the point. They never were. The point is what you build in the space they left by not believing in you. The specific, solid, load-bearing thing you construct when no one is watching, not for the moment when they find out, though that moment will come, but for the thing itself, for the work, for the person you are becoming while they are busy being certain you are nothing. Celine Hargrove did not make me. She is not in my story the way she once imagined she was. She is a chapter and not the most important one. The most important ones are my mother at 6 a.m. with an empty groundnut tray, Mrs. Osei handing me the next book without asking why I was still there, Priya with bad coffee on a Sunday morning, Darius blinking at the ceiling so he wouldn't have to admit he was proud, Mrs. Calloway with the good handbag and no questions. The most important chapters are the ones that held me while I was building. What I know now is that being underestimated by the wrong person is only a problem if you agree with their assessment. The moment you stop agreeing, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes fuel. And fuel, used correctly, does not destroy. It just keeps you moving forward long after the people who doubted you have run out of reasons to keep watching. If you have ever been the person in the room that someone else decided didn't belong there, share this. Someone needs to hear that the room does not get to decide who you become. That is entirely up to you. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. Because there is always another one, and the next one is waiting.